So, the year 2025 is drawing to an end, and what a year it has been. We live in interesting times, you might say, and not necessarily in a good way. But I was able to get a good deal of reading done in 2025. I think I more or less reached my goal of one book per week. Actually, I probably exceeded that, given that there were some things which I read that I did not review here on the channel. I think I'm sitting pretty as regards what I wanted to get accomplished reading wise in the year. But now that the year is coming to a close, it is time to rank the 10 best books that I read in 2025. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to lay down some ground rules here. Number one, this ranking only consists of fiction. I read a fair deal of nonfiction in 2025 as well, but I just don't think that I could fairly rank those along with fictional books. I just don't think the criteria would kind of apply. So nonfiction has been excluded from the running here. Number two, this ranking consists only of books which I read in 2025 for the first time. I did some rereading this year as well. Like I reread Cormac McCarthy's The Passenger, and if I was going to include rereads, that book would have just topped the list again. Like I also reread The Lord of the Rings this year, and if I would have included rereads on this list, that book would have probably been in here, but I didn't. So these are only books that I read this year for the first time. And number three, this ranking is based upon my own subjective feelings regarding these books. Like in the individual reviews that I did of these books, I tried to be as objective as possible to rate them based upon how well they were executed and whatever qualities they possessed or lacked. But with this overall year-end ranking, this is just my subjective preferences. These are just the books that I happen to enjoy the most. So if you watched the individual reviews of these books and now you're watching this and you're like, well, wait, you have books higher ranked here that had lower ratings than the individual reviews. Again, this is just my subjective preferences. These are just the books that I enjoyed more. So the individual reviews of these books were objective. This ranking here is just purely subjective. With that out of the way, before we get into the top 10 best ranking, I also want to say a word on the worst book that I happened to read in 2025. Normally, I like to include like the worst books that I read in the year as well as the best, but thankfully this year I only read one book that actively aroused my ire. So there's only like one bad book on here, and that book would be Ottessa Moshfegh's Lapvona. Oh my word, this book was pretty much an irredeemable piece of shit. And I remember when this book came out a few years ago. I think it came out in 2022, and I remember seeing booktubers on here review this book positively and say that it was like a really great work and that it was really worthwhile to read it. And to them, I would say, what the hell were you smoking and where can I get some? Because this book is awful. It is mind-bogglingly stupid. It is shockingly juvenile. It also feels very undercooked, very poorly thought out. And of course, that makes perfect sense given that I believe this was written during the COVID pandemic. I assume to alleviate boredom, perhaps, during the lockdowns. And yeah, it reads like that. This feels very undercooked, something that's very just tossed off. And what irked me so much about this book is that you have people who have creative contributions that they might like to make, who struggle to get an agent or a publisher to look their way. But then you have published authors, like professionally published authors like Ottessa Moshfegh, who have a pretty sizable name brand, just apparently grow complacent in their success and sit back on their laurels and just churn out just absolute pieces of trash like Lapvona. Again, this book is just like, I was kind of taken aback by how puerile and how stupid this book was. It has almost no redeeming qualities at all. I believe that Lapvona was the lowest rated book that I read in 2025. So for that reason, it earns the spot on this ranking for the worst book that I read in the year. Lapvona, just absolute piece of shit. Terrible book. You should not read it. Ignore those other booktubers whose videos you might come across in which they praise this book. They don't know what they're talking about, but I do. Don't read this book. It is absolute trash. And for that reason, it is the worst book that I read in 2025. Now, on to the good stuff. So, kicking off our list of the 10 best books that I read in 2025, we have, I think, the most recent read on here, and that would be Bret Easton Ellis's Less Than Zero. This was Ellis's debut novel, and it definitely feels like a debut. It's not as strong as some of his later work, but I liked this book, and some people commented on the review of it that I did. They were like, "I don't really like this book. It's kind of shallow and dumb, and it's not really that great." And I totally get those criticisms. Bret Easton Ellis overall is just an author who is not going to be for everyone's taste. Like American Psycho is kind of a love it or hate it book. And the same applies for Less Than Zero, but I just happen to like it. I guess I'm kind of partial, I suppose, to Ellis's style, because this definitely is Ellis's style. Like this feels like his later work, just not quite as strong as his later work. But I enjoyed it. It's very repetitive, and the characters have no depth, and the writing is incredibly simple. And as I said in the review of it, you might think, like, if you just judge the book based on its component parts, that this book should not be good. But its quality is kind of an emergent property, like I said in that review of it. And, I liked it. It's only number 10 because, again, it's not all that great, but I enjoyed it. And, it kind of captured something of a zeitgeist, I guess, a simultaneously glamorous and yet grimy zeitgeist of early 1980s Los Angeles affluence. And, for what it is, I can respect it. I enjoyed it enough. Although, again, I totally understand people not liking this because Ellis overall is just an author that's not going to be for everyone. But I enjoyed Less Than Zero. So, yeah, number 10 best book that I read this year was Bret Easton Ellis's debut novel, Less Than Zero. Now, coming in at number 9, we have probably the most garish and hideous cover of any book I read this year. That would be Lord Byron's Manfred. This is just Byronic to the core. You hear the Byronic hero, right? This is that defined. This is the textbook definition of the Byronic hero. This is a very short closet drama about a Faustian nobleman who lives in a castle in the mountains, very, very gothic, and he communes with spirits and pines for his lost love, which may or may not have been of an incestuous nature, which is just kind of autobiographical to an extent, of Lord Byron's actual life. This is, again, it's very short, but it just captures Byron's personality so well. Like, as I said in my review of this, Friedrich Nietzsche really admired Lord Byron because Lord Byron was such a free spirit. Like, he really marched to the beat of his own drum, and you kind of got to tip your hat to him for that because, in the era in which he lived, that was probably more difficult to do than it is nowadays. But you can definitely feel a kind of Nietzschean vibe when reading Manfred, because Manfred is kind of like the Ubermensch, right? He, much like his author, marches to the beat of his own drum. He's also not afraid of like supernatural repercussions such as hell and damnation. In fact, at the ending of the book, he is appealed to by a priest to repent of his deeds and turn to the light, so to speak. And it ends with that just immortal line, which says, well, it's not the last line, but Manfred's last line in the work is the immortal line, "Old man, 'tis not so difficult to die." It's just Byron to the core, and I love it for that. It's entertaining. It's very very brief. You can probably read this in like an hour or two, but it leaves a mark because of just how powerfully it conveys its author's sentiments and views. It's a neat little work, and if you like Lord Byron's poetry, you might owe it to yourself to pick this up. This particular edition is a print-on-demand version that I found on Amazon, which has a cover which has no bearing whatsoever on the actual story and is utterly hideous. But don't judge a book by its cover. Manfred was a good read. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and so coming in at number 9 on my list of the best books of 2025 is Manfred by Lord Byron. Now, coming in at number 8 on my list, we have Apt Pupil by Stephen King. Yes, Stephen King made my list, even though I am notoriously not the biggest fan of Stephen King. This book really caught me off guard because Apt Pupil is, by a pretty large margin, I would say, the darkest thing that Stephen King ever wrote. Like, Stephen King's books are dark, they're, violent, they're often perverse, but there's always comic relief or, some kind of positive message about the power of friendship or, good conquers evil, that kind of thing. This book does not have any of that. This is also pretty realistic. This is realist fiction. And it feels very plausible to a certain extent, but it is so grim. It's also written without that corniness that Stephen King often indulges in. And the ending to this was very bleak. Like, I was really caught off guard by how against type this book feels for Stephen King's, usual fare. But it's also a quality product. Like, the story, it's very concisely paced. And again, that's kind of an outlier for Stephen King. The characters are very stark, very, like, grim and grimly memorable. But I think the story was quite powerful. I think it is a kind of a nasty little shocker of a book. And again, it feels decidedly different in tone from pretty much anything else that Stephen King has written. But I can respect it for that. It was harrowing. It was very, again, just bleak without much silver lining to it. But, it's kind of staring into the abyss. But I can commend it for that. And so, coming in at number 8 of the best books that I read in 2025, we have Stephen King's Apt Pupil. Now, coming in at number 7 on my list, we have one of Stephen King's prime competitors, and that would be Dean Koontz and his book, Whispers. Now, this book is the book, if you've seen my review of it, which I say inaugurated Dean Koontz's golden age. And is this Dean Koontz's best book? Not by a long shot, no. But it is the book that kind of, again, inaugurated the golden age of his career. And it also served to remind me why Dean Koontz became such a titan in the thriller genre, because this book is a true page turner. Like, it ain't like Dostoevsky or Shakespeare. It's not like, high caliber, capital L literature. But for what it is a damn fine thriller. And it really did serve to remind me why Dean Koontz, why he became as successful as he did. Because when he was on his game, he could churn out some serious bangers. Now, the books he puts out now are weaker, I would say. In fact, considerably weaker, generally speaking, than the books he put out in the 80s and halfway through the 90s. But this book kicked off that, again, just golden age of his career. It is, just a wire-taut thriller novel about a woman being menaced, maybe or maybe not supernaturally, by a man who may be two men, or perhaps you might say two men who may be one man. If you've read the book, you'll understand. But like it goes and it goes hard. Now, of course, it also kind of has some of the trappings of the early, more desperate Dean Koontz, where he was not afraid to go for titillation. That is, a lot of the sex scenes in this book are just like flat out pornographic, and they go on and on. The characters also are kind of stock and archetypal. But if you can get around that, what you have is a crackerjack thriller novel that really did, uh, you know, catapult its author to the top of that field. And if you go back and read it now, you can definitely see why Dean Koontz became as big as he did, because this is a great book. Honestly, I mean, it's not Dostoevsky or Shakespeare, but for what it is a great little book. It had me flying through these pages like only the best thrillers can. And so for that reason, coming in at number 7 on my best list of 2025, we have Whispers by Dean Koontz. Now, coming in at number 6, we have The Stonemason by Cormac McCarthy. Yes, I reread The Passenger this year. And if I had counted rereads, that one would have topped the list. But I also was able to squeak in another Cormac McCarthy book onto my best list, and that is this one, The Stonemason. This is a play, a highly unconventional play. In fact, it's so unconventional that I strongly doubt that it is very frequently, if ever, performed. But it nonetheless is a great little work, honestly. It's a minor work of McCarthy's. Like, it's not up there with Blood Meridian or The Passenger or The Crossing, but it is definitely a worthwhile read. And it's also against type for him, because it's not bleak and harrowing like many, if not most, of his books are. In fact, the overall message of this book is pretty close to being outright uplifting. And I have to say, again, that kind of caught me off guard. But The Stonemason is a very intimate, very touching portrait of a black family dealing with domestic issues in the early 1970s, and also pontificating on the more spiritual aspects of the craft of stonemasonry. And if that doesn't sound terribly compelling, I assure you it actually is more so than I probably make it out to be. Again, this is not one of McCarthy's most high profile works. In fact, it's one of his most underrated. Like, you virtually never hear this brought up in conversation almost. It's only for the die-hard McCarthy fans. But it's a quality work. It's a nifty little work, which tells a pretty powerful story, if, again, somewhat unconventionally, at least for theater. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's again, it's an underrated gem, I think. It's not McCarthy's most well-known work, but I think it should be more well-known than it is. So yeah, coming in at number 6 on my best list of 2025 is The Stonemason by Cormac McCarthy. And now, coming in at number 5, we have a book that might be a little bit unusual. That is this book, The Richest Man in Babylon by George S. Clason. And this is a collection of short stories, parables to be specific, which all pertain to money and its acquisition. This is a classic text of personal finance, because it gives you advice on how to make that scratch, right? Now, if you think that this book is like hokey or kind of a grift, like a lot of those books are, like Think and Grow Rich or Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that kind of thing, I assure you it is not. And the reason why this book made it onto my best reads list and made it to number 5 on that list is because the advice that it gives is very, very sound. This is nothing outlandish where it's like, you too can be a billionaire if only you do these following things. It's not like that. It just teaches you how to save, how to set aside money to, basically like work for you if you can make it, how to spend wisely, not to just fritter away money on, extravagant, useless crap. and also to how to pay your debts promptly. In fact, one of the best stories in this, actually the one that really went a long way to getting this book on this list and this highly on this list, is a story. Let me see if I can find it here in the table of contents. I think it is The Luckiest Man in Babel. No, it's maybe it was The Camel Trader. I think it was The Camel Trader of Babylon. I think it was that one. Either way, there's one story in here about paying your debts and not running away from your obligations, and like being a man and like owning up to what you owe and paying what you owe, that really, beyond just a piece of financial advice, is actually like a very powerful and worthwhile message to take to heart. And I really like this book. Again, it's not corny, it's not a grift either, that's going to teach you how to be a billionaire in 3 months if you just do this and this. It's not like that. It just teaches you how to be literate with your money, with your finances, because financial illiteracy is a very grave problem. You have a lot of people out there, like a lot of grown adult people, that do not know how to manage money, that live hand to mouth because they just go through whatever they accumulate just as soon as they get it. And this book has a lot of pertinent and very valuable advice to not be that way. And I respect it, but beyond that, it's also, or at least some of it, certain stories in this are actually like commendable works of literature in their own right. Everything in this centers around the ancient city of Babylon, but it's universally applicable to pretty much any time and place. So yeah, I really love this little book. The Richest Man in Babylon, coming in at number 5 on my best reads of 2025. Now, coming in at number 4, we have a very, very unknown book, kind of a lost gem, you might say, that's been forgotten by history, and that would be The Driver by Garrett Garrett. That is the author's actual name. This is the tale of the rise of a railroad tycoon in the late 1800s, early 1900s era, the Gilded Age, if you will. And this book is something that I think a lot of people might be apt to find boring, because it's business fiction. It's about a stockbroker who parlays his money into the stock of a failing railroad company, and then turns it around and becomes a tycoon, like one of the wealthiest men in the world. But the thing is, it's not cynical about that. Like, this is also a book that probably doesn't really fit with the modern mindset as regards business as kind of a dirty word, because this is definitely an ode to like the John D. Rockefellers and the Andrew Carnegies, like those bygone titans of industry of the Gilded Age, who like became so wealthy that it's honestly kind of hard to fathom. But it's not cynical. It's not like taking shots at that. This is an ode to that type of man, the great businessman, and it makes no apologies. Like, it doesn't shy from the more cutthroat aspects of business. It's very kind of socially Darwinian in its perspective, but if you can get on its wavelength, you'll find a kind of, again, a forgotten gem that has kind of been lost to history. It's also quite well written. It is a very well written little book, and again, a lot of people might just find it boring, but I didn't. I thought it was actually quite engaging. I really, really liked it. It's definitely something from a different time, but like I said, if you can get on its wavelength, you might find a really good story here. So yeah, coming in at number 4 on the best list of 2025, we have The Driver by Garrett Garrett. And now, coming in at number 3, this was one of the first books that I read this year, and I knew then that it was going to be pretty highly pretty high probably on the year-end ranking, and that would be Midnight Cowboy by James Leo Herlihy. This is the basis for the classic film starring Jon Voight and Dustin Hoffman. It is the tale of a young man who is not terribly bright and who has virtually no one with whom he is like emotionally intimate. He is basically completely alone. And he decides to go to the Big Apple to try to be a gigolo. And what ensues is a pretty melancholic meditation on male loneliness and social isolation. It is incredibly powerful emotionally, and it is also just absolutely phenomenally well written. Like the prose in this, I was marveling at pretty much constantly. James Leo Herlihy was a great writer. This is the only thing that I read by him. But I definitely would not mind reading more because Midnight Cowboy was a fantastic book. Like I said, I knew back when I read this at the beginning of the year that this was probably going to be pretty high on the best list because it is that good. If you've seen the movie is pretty close to this, but it doesn't quite have the same depth. Like plot-wise, it pretty much hits all the same beats, but there's a lot more introspection in this, and there's kind of a lot more backstory to the main character in this than there is in the movie, and it comes out to marvelous effect. Like it is an incredibly powerful book, and by the time you get to the end, it really does hit like a train. It's just a fantastic and very emotionally affecting book that is incredibly well written with a main character who is very well fleshed out and very, very relatable. And so my prediction was right. James Leo Herlihy's Midnight Cowboy did rank highly on my best list at number 3. So at number 2, we have possibly the greatest collection of short stories ever written, or at least the greatest that I have yet to read, and that would be the collected fictions of Jorge Luis Borges. What to say about this book? Like, well, I can't really summarize the plot because there is no one plot. Again, it's just the collected short stories, like all, I think, the collected short stories of Jorge Luis Borges. And damn, this is, again, possibly the finest collection ever compiled, or at least that I've ever encountered, because these stories are like breathtaking. They're so cerebral, they're so stimulating. So much of it I was just kind of like, you would read the story and then you just kind of stare into space like, wow, just think about that. Like just entertain that notion. That's kind of the effect that this book had. These stories are just they're examples of pretty much perfect stories executed by a master of the craft. Because, you know, short story writing in many ways might be even more difficult than writing like long fiction, because you have to know what to do and what not to do. You have to know what to leave out, what to put to make every word hit just right and have the maximum effect. And Borges was a master of that. These stories are again, these are like some of the best short stories ever. I mean, seriously. And again, I went through them in my review and kind of pulled out some of my favorites. So check that out if you want to know like which ones I enjoyed the most. But like overall, this book really took my breath away because of just how consistently good and how consistently inventive and stimulating these stories are. Because I think, you know, probably the best thing you can do with a short story is try to go for the intellect, maybe not so much the emotions, because that would be kind of hard to get into a short piece of fiction. But you can get some really intriguing concepts worked into short fiction, and Borges does that masterfully in this book, because again, these stories just like, they really can blow your mind. Honestly, this is a mind-blowing collection of short stories, and for that reason it is number 2 on my best reads of 2025, the collected fictions of Jorge Luis Borges. And now Drum roll, please. My number one best read of 2025 was The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver. This book is chilling. It really is, because of just how feasible it feels when reading this. This is easily the most realistic, apocalyptic, if you want to call it that, slash dystopian novel I have ever read. It is about again, if you want to call it that, a financial apocalypse in which America repudiates its national debt. And again, that just feels all the more realistic given that national debt grows by $1 trillion every about, I think it's like 180 days. And America is subsequently excluded from the global market. When we have like hyperinflation that makes like Weimar Germany and Zimbabwe look like child's play, total collapse of society, and then the ensuing society, which is built out of the ashes of the old America, is chilling in just how realistic it feels to like something that could actually be. This is by like a very large margin, once again, the most realistic and feasible apocalypse slash dystopia I've ever read. It feels like something that could just be right around the corner, and very well might be right around the corner given current trends. But one thing that I absolutely adored about this book, the thing that really cemented this as the number one read of this year, is that the perspective with which this book is written is very distinct from what you might encounter in probably the majority of fiction published nowadays, and that is because of the way that it ends. So at the end of the book, and I don't want to go back and summarize the whole plot, but at the end of the book, America has kind of reconstituted itself after its financial collapse, but it's full on dystopic. Like the Second Amendment has been completely repealed. All the citizens have been totally disarmed. In order to do like business, you have to be microchipped with a chip at the base of your skull, which tracks you and also tracks all your financial transactions to monitor, because everyone's finances are rigorously monitored. It's got that like Chinese social credit score vibe going on, but there the America that has emerged from the ashes of the old is like functional, but it is anything but free. But then we have the state of, I think it's Nevada in here, which is like it has seceded from the rest of America, and like nobody knows what goes on inside Nevada. It's like this blank zone on the map because it's totally disconnected from the outside country. And our main character at the end of this book has to make the decision either to live like a rat in a cage, microchipped and all, and to slave away for his government taskmasters, or to risk it all and go to Nevada, the last frontier, and try to make his fortune in basically an unknown milieu. And he does. And that is why this book won out for me the top spot on the best list of the year, because it recognizes that freedom is paramount, that liberty is more important than security. Like, to answer those protest signs that you see sometimes with people holding them that says, is freedom more important than safety? Yes, it is. It is the most important thing ever. And I was very surprised to see such an endorsement in this book, especially given this book, especially like given the current mindset. But I loved it. I loved it because of how daring it was, and also again because of how chillingly plausible it is. But this book is just fantastically written as well. Lionel Shriver is a great writer. The characters are fully fleshed out, very memorable, and very, very human, both in the pros and in the cons of that word. But it's also just, again, it's like looking kind of in a crystal ball, because you know that like what this book depicts very well could happen again, it's the most realistic depiction of an apocalypse and dystopia that I've ever encountered. And I just admired it so much because of the attitude that it evinces at the end, where the character abandons safety and security completely to go be free in this totally unknown environment. And salute to Lionel Shriver. This book is fantastic. Like I said in my review of it, I don't know what I would consider the best books of the 21st century, but the Mandibles absolutely would be on that list. Like Cormac McCarthy's The Passenger is number one, but the Mandibles might very well be number two. It is just an absolutely fantastic book. It is affecting. It's also funny. It's kind of got this caustic, almost black humor to it, but it's funny. But it's also by turns tragic as well. But there is a worldview to this, a perspective, which is very much, I would say, outside the norm, but which I think is very laudable and very respectable. And I did respect this book for it because it's just an absolutely phenomenal book. It's a masterpiece. I feel fully comfortable in using that word. I think the Mandibles is a masterpiece. I'd say it's probably Lionel Shriver's masterpiece, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it so much that it earned the top spot, the number one place on my best reads of 2025. So that has been the 10 best and 1 worst book that I read in 2025. Again, I think I did pretty good with my overall goals. I think I exceeded them actually because, again, there were some things that I read which I did not review on here. So I think I came out pretty good overall. But, yep, 2025 is coming to a close. But here's hoping that 2026 will be a more positive year, both as regards literature, but also the world more broadly. But let me know down in the comments what you read in 2025, what your best reads were, and your worst, if you want to say, if you met your goals and all that kind of jazz. And here's to 2026. Here's hoping that 2026 is a good year. Happy New Year. So yeah, and as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.